Eli Turner had grown up under the hot Texas sun, working from the time he could walk. His father had been a proud rancher, known for his hard hands and harder work. But when his father passed away, Eli was left with more debt than cattle. The ranch that had once been full of life now felt empty and tired. The fences were broken, the barn roof leaked when it rained, and the grass had turned dry from months of drought. Every morning, Eli saddled his horse before dawn and rode out across the dusty fields, trying to find a way to keep things running. But the harder he worked, the worse things seemed to get. The feed cost too much, the market prices dropped, and the bank was already sending letters with red ink on them. He could barely sleep at night, thinking about how he might lose everything his father had built. One evening, Eli sat at the old wooden table staring at the stack of bills. The lantern light flickered and the house creaked in the quiet. He felt like the walls were closing in on him. Then his cousin Ray, who lived a few towns over, came by with an idea, or what Eli would later call a crazy miracle. Ray leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee, and said, "You remember Martha Bell?" Eli frowned. "Can't say I do. She's that woman who inherited the Bell Ranch after her daddy passed. She's got money, land, and more cattle than she can manage. But here's the thing, she's looking for a husband." Eli raised an eyebrow. "A husband?" Ray nodded, smirking a little. "Yeah, not for love, though. Word is she wants someone who can run the ranch, do the work, and handle the business side. In return, she'll share everything 50-50. Eli laughed, shaking his head. "So you're saying I should marry a stranger for her ranch?" Ray leaned forward, serious now. "I'm saying it's your last chance. The bank's not going to wait forever. And Martha, she's kind, but she's lonely. Folks say she's big and quiet. Doesn't talk much. Maybe she just needs someone who won't judge her." Eli didn't answer. He just sat there, the idea turning in his mind. He wasn't proud of it, not one bit, but deep down he knew Ray was right. He was running out of time, and this might be the only way to save his family's land. The next week, Eli rode his old truck into Bell County. He'd never been to the Bell Ranch before. When he arrived, the sight nearly took his breath away. The place was huge, green fields stretching far, a big red barn standing tall against the sky, and a house that looked more like a country mansion. It was everything his own ranch used to be, and more. He parked by the gate and saw her standing there. Martha Bell. She was a large woman, yes, but there was something gentle about her face. Soft brown eyes, hair tied neatly back, and a shy smile that appeared and disappeared quickly. She wore an old blue dress and work boots as if she had just come in from the field. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, her voice warm but cautious. "I appreciate you coming." Eli tipped his hat. "Ma'am, thank you for having me." They sat on the porch talking as the evening breeze passed between them. Martha spoke quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She explained how her father had left her everything, but running a ranch alone wasn't easy. The workers often took advantage of her kindness. Some left without notice. Others spread gossip in town about how she was too big to run a ranch or too shy to lead. Eli listened, nodding. He noticed the sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes from being laughed at one too many times. Finally, she looked at him and said, "I'm not asking for love, Mr. Turner. I'm asking for partnership, someone who will work with me, not against me. You'll have a home, a share in the ranch, and a fair say in all decisions. In return, I ask only for honesty and respect." Eli thought about it for a long time that night. He knew what people would say if he married her, that he did it for money, for land, for his own benefit. And maybe at first that was true, but when he looked at Martha he saw something else too, a quiet strength that made him feel small inside. A week later they married in a small church with only a few witnesses. There was no music, no dancing, just a simple promise and two people who barely knew each other. Martha wore a pale yellow dress that made her cheeks glow, and Eli wore his best, though slightly worn, suit. When the ceremony ended, she smiled shyly and said, "Welcome home, Mr. Turner." At first, life on the Bell Ranch was quiet. Too quiet. Martha was kind but distant. She cooked for him, made sure he had what he needed, but she never forced conversation. Eli slept in the guest room, telling himself it was just until they got used to each other. He spent most of his days out in the fields or working with the ranch hands, keeping busy so he wouldn't have to think about the awkwardness between them. The neighbors whispered, Some called him lucky, others called him shameless. When he walked into town, he could feel their stares. "That Turner boy married the fat woman for her land," one man whispered once, thinking Eli couldn't hear. Eli clenched his jaw but said nothing. Deep down, he knew they weren't entirely wrong. But something unexpected started to happen. Every morning, Martha was already awake before him, feeding the animals and checking the fences. She worked hard, harder than most men Eli had ever met. She didn't complain about the heat or the dust, and she never asked for help unless she really needed it. When the workers saw her carrying buckets or fixing the broken gate, they began to respect her too. One afternoon, Eli watched her talking to a supplier about feed prices. She spoke with confidence, her tone firm but polite. The man who had once tried to overcharge her nodded quickly and agreed to her price. Eli had never seen that side of her before, strong, smart, and completely in control. That night at dinner, he said quietly, "You handled that man well today." Martha looked up, surprised. "Thank you," she said, her eyes lighting up for a moment before she looked down again. It was the first real conversation they'd had that didn't feel forced. As the weeks passed, the ranch started to come alive again. Martha had new ideas, rotating pastures, using better grain, even talking about starting a small dairy business. Eli didn't think much of her plans at first, but he soon saw results. The grass grew thicker, the cows looked healthier, and for the first time in years, money started coming in instead of going out. Eli began to feel something shift inside him. He still didn't understand Martha completely, but he couldn't deny she was changing everything around them, quietly, steadily, and with a grace that made him look at her differently. One evening, he found her sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in orange and pink, and the air smelled like hay in summer. He sat beside her without saying a word. After a while, she said softly, "I know why you married me, Eli. You don't have to pretend." He turned to her, caught off guard. "Martha, she smiled a little sadly. "It's all right. I understand, but I hope one day you'll see that I'm more than what people say about me." Eli didn't know how to answer. All he could do was nod. But as he sat there watching the woman beside him, the woman who worked harder than anyone he'd known, who faced gossip with quiet dignity, he began to realize something he hadn't before. Maybe this marriage wasn't just his way out of trouble. Maybe it was a second chance, and for both of them. And for the first time in a long while, Eli felt a spark of hope that the story of his life might not end the way it had begun. Months passed after their quiet marriage, and life on the Bell Ranch began to take on a steady rhythm. Eli had grown used to the early mornings, the smell of coffee drifting through the house, and Martha's calm voice calling out to the workers. Still, he kept a certain distance. He told himself it was better that way. No feelings, no complications. But deep inside, something about Martha's quiet strength kept pulling at him. She had a way of seeing things differently. When a fence broke, Eli would rush to fix it right away. Martha, on the other hand, would stop and study the ground, noticing where the posts had rotted and how the wind had shifted the soil. She didn't just fix things. She improved them. Eli began to notice that her ideas weren't just good. They worked. Soon the ranch started showing real signs of life. The cattle were healthier, the grass thicker, and the barns cleaner than they'd been in years. Martha brought new order to everything, but she did it without ever raising her voice. The ranch hands, who at first doubted her, now respected her deeply. They started calling her Miss Martha with pride in their voices. Eli couldn't help but watch her in quiet admiration. She moved through her days with a calm purpose, never rushing, never complaining. When she laughed, a soft, unexpected laugh, it felt like sunlight breaking through a cloudy day. Still, guilt lived quietly in Eli's heart. He remembered why he had married her, not out of love, but out of desperation. He had never lied to her, but he had never told her the full truth either. Sometimes, late at night, he'd look out over the ranch and wonder if he deserved the second chance life had given him. One hot afternoon, Eli fell ill. He had been out working in the sun for hours, repairing a broken water pipe when his head began to spin. The heat was heavy, pressing down on him like a weight. He tried to keep going, but his body gave up. The last thing he remembered was falling against the fence and everything going dark. When he woke up, he was lying in bed, the ceiling fan turning slowly above him. Martha sat beside the bed with a cool cloth in her hand. Her eyes were tired, but her face showed only concern. "You gave us quite a scare," she said softly. "You had heat exhaustion. I found you out by the fence." Eli tried to sit up, but she gently pressed him back. "Don't move too much. You need rest." He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Her hair was a little messy, her dress wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She must have been caring for him for hours. He felt a deep wave of shame wash over him. This woman, whom he had married for her land, had stayed up all night just to make sure he was safe. Over the next few days, Martha took care of him like he was family. She made soup, checked his temperature, and sat with him even when he drifted in and out of sleep. Whenever he tried to thank her, she simply smiled and said, "That's what partners do." Eli. Those words stuck in his mind long after he recovered. Partners. She still saw him that way, even after knowing his heart had been half shut. When Eli finally returned to work, he found himself wanting to make things easier for her. He started listening more, asking for her advice on decisions and even helping with her new ideas. They began spending more time together, checking the cattle, riding out to inspect the land, and sitting on the porch in the evenings as the sky turned golden. One day, Martha mentioned a plan to start selling dairy products from their cows instead of just beef. Eli had never thought about it, but she showed him numbers and small charts she had drawn by hand. Her eyes lit up with excitement as she spoke. "We could earn twice as much in a few years if we start now," she said. Eli smiled. "You've thought this through, haven't you?" She blushed a little. "I've had a lot of time to think, Eli." He laughed, shaking his head. "Well, I reckon we better get started then." That was the first time they truly worked together, not as two people tied by marriage, but as a team. They spent long days preparing the barns, buying equipment, and learning new methods. There were setbacks, of course, bad weather, machinery breaking, unexpected bills. But somehow, working side by side made every challenge easier to face. Eli began to see a different side of Martha every day. When things went wrong, she didn't panic. She simply smiled and said, "We'll fix it. We always do." That quiet faith of hers gave him strength when his own started to fade. As the months turned into a year, something inside Eli changed without him even realizing it. He began to look forward to hearing her voice in the morning, to seeing her smile when she handed him a cup of coffee. He found himself noticing the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about the ranch, and how her laughter seemed to fill every empty space in his heart. The townspeople began to notice too. They no longer whispered about the poor rancher who married for land. Instead, they spoke with admiration. "Those two turned that place around," people would say. "The Bells have made something special out there." One evening, after a long day's work, Eli stood outside watching the sun set over the fields. Martha came out quietly and stood beside him. For a while, they said nothing. The air was still and the light turned everything gold. "You've done a lot for this ranch," he said softly. Martha smiled. "We've done it together." Eli hesitated, then turned to face her. "No, Martha, you're the reason this place came alive again. I thought I knew what hard work was, but you showed me what it really means." Her eyes softened, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then after a long silence, Eli said the words that had been sitting on his heart for months. "When I married you, I didn't understand what love was. I thought I was doing what I had to do, but now I know I was given something better than I ever deserved." Martha's eyes glistened and she looked away, blinking fast. "Eli, you don't have to say that." "But I want to," he said gently. "You didn't just save this ranch, Martha. You saved me." She turned back toward him, and for the first time since their wedding day, she took his hand. It felt warm, steady, and right. They stood there together, watching the sun dip below the hills, the light wrapping around them like a promise. From that day forward, their life together was different. It wasn't perfect, no life ever is, but it was real. They worked, laughed, and sometimes disagreed. But they did it all as partners, equals, and friends who had found love in the most unexpected way. Years later, when people asked Eli about how he turned his life around, he would smile and point toward Martha. "It wasn't me," he'd say. "It was her heart. I just followed where it led." The poor rancher who once married for land had found something far greater, a love that grew quietly, like the grass after rain, strong and lasting. And in the golden light of the Bell Ranch, Two souls who once came together out of need found the true meaning of home.